The crisp bite of a Boston winter. The backdrop for a life I thought I knew. I was 30 and my world was pretty good. I'd been married to Michael for 5 years. I loved my job, and I had a nice home in the quiet, charming Brookline neighborhood. I had a good work-life family balance, and I was pretty content. But then, it seemed like things were headed in a different direction. The morning it all began, I was relaxing with a hot cup of coffee. The radio was playing softly in the background when my phone rang. It was Claire, my best friend from our Dartmouth days. She sounded urgent, and I could tell something was wrong. "Emily," she began, her words coming out fast. "I was hoping you could do me a big favor. It's about Jacob. My son, Jacob, has just relocated to Boston. I don't know anyone in the city who can help him settle in. Could you give me a hand?" she asked, her voice trailing off. There was an unspoken plea in the air. We were years and miles apart. Claire was in New York, and I was in Boston. But we stayed close, just like we had in college. As usual, I replied without a moment's hesitation. "Jacob." In that moment, with that simple act, I set in motion a chain of events that would shatter the illusion of my perfect life and leave me forever changed. "Jacob can stay with us while he looks for a place to live." I said yes right away. I had a vague recollection of Jacob from a few family gatherings the last time he was in town. He was a gangly, shy teenager, about 16. He was a teenager, a boy of 16 who rarely spoke unless prompted. Now, 7 years later, I was preparing to welcome this young man into my home. I wasn't sure what to expect when he arrived. Michael and I met him at Logan Airport. We waited in the busy terminal, and I kept thinking about Jacob. Would he still be the reserved guy I remembered? Or would he have grown into a more confident young man? I got my answer the moment he stepped through the arrival gate. He strode through the arrival gate, and I was immediately struck by how much he'd changed. He was now a tall, athletic guy with a smile that could light up a room. His striking green eyes had a depth that seemed to pierce through you, and his carefully styled hair gave him an air of undeniable sophistication. In the bright airport lights, his skin had a radiant glow, and he had a commanding presence. I was at a loss for words, Aunt Emily. Jacob's voice was warm and had a hint of that quality. That was the moment I realized I was lost in thought. Even though we weren't related by blood, he'd always called me Aunt, and that hadn't changed. He gave me a hug, and I couldn't help but notice the firmness of his. I got a little chill. I was surprised by how I felt. I pulled away, hoping my reaction hadn't given anything away. Michael was too busy greeting Jacob to notice my inner turmoil. Jacob gave me a warm welcome, like an older brother would, gave me a pat on the back, and his excitement was contagious. Jacob was really excited to tell us all about his studies at Boston University, his aspirations to become an architect, and the thrill of embarking on this new chapter in the city. I nodded along, trying to focus on what he was saying, but I couldn't stop thinking about that unexpected jolt I had felt earlier. Having him in our home was going to be an interesting adjustment, to say the least. I tried to focus on the conversation during the drive, but I found myself stealing glances at Jacob. In the rearview mirror, his piercing green eyes seemed to meet mine more than once, watching me with a kind of intensity that made me feel a bit uncomfortable. The first few days after he arrived went smoothly. I helped Jacob get settled by showing him around the city, helping him get oriented on the Boston University campus, and introducing him to the local neighborhoods. Michael was busy with his work as a corporate lawyer. He was mostly in the office, leaving Jacob and me to fend for ourselves for large parts of the day. It was during one of these outings that everything started to change. We took a stroll through the Boston Public Garden, enjoying the crisp winter air and the faint scent of pine. The scenery was really tranquil, a great escape from the hustle and bustle of the city. Jacob suddenly stopped Emily. He stopped Emily, his voice soft. I was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. I turned to look at him, a little surprised. I could see he was serious. "I just wanted to say thanks for all your help." "You don't have to thank me, Jacob. I know you're grateful for my help, and I appreciate it. It's my pleasure to help you, but—" Then he stepped closer, and we were almost face to face. His eyes met mine, and I could see a change in his attitude. "No, really," he said, his voice even softer. "Now you are." I felt a strange warmth rise to my cheeks. I could feel the intensity of his gaze on my skin. The silence of the garden was palpable, and it was impossible to ignore the charged atmosphere between us. My mind was racing, but I quickly pushed the thoughts away. I was set on keeping the boundaries I'd always had in place. "Keep going, Leighton," I said, in a brisk tone. I stepped forward and pointed to the path, but as we walked through the garden, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. "I've always respected you a great deal. Ever since I was a kid." He caught me off guard, and I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. He was really sincere, and his green eyes met mine. His gaze made my heart skip a beat for a moment. I was caught up in his gaze and realized how dangerous this was. I took a step back, and the spell was broken. "Let's head back." My voice was a little shaky. It was getting late, and Michael would be home soon. On our way back to the car, we could both feel the tension in the air. Jacob kept looking at me, and each time our arms accidentally brushed, it sent a little thrill through my body. I kept reminding myself that this was the wrong thing to do. He's the son of your best friend. He's young enough to be your son, and you're married. You're married, after all. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself that something had changed in the days that followed, I was still caught in an internal battle every moment. Being alone with Jacob was a test of my sanity, and I was trying to ignore the attraction. I noticed I was paying more attention to my appearance. I was choosing my clothes with more care and applying just a touch of makeup, as if I were a teenager getting ready for a date. One afternoon, it all came to a head. I was showing Jacob how to use the washing machine in the basement. Michael was out of town on business, so the house was unusually empty. As we bent down to load the clothes, our hands froze, and there was a sudden crackle of energy in the air around us. Jacob slowly turned to face me. His eyes were intense. "Emily," he said quietly. It reflected my own feelings. He spoke in a low, intense voice. I couldn't help but notice Jacob's lips. They were on mine before I even had a chance to process it. The kiss was pretty intense. It was the result of weeks of pent-up longing and forbidden desire. My fingers found their way into his hair, the soft strands contrasting with the urgency of his embrace as he pressed me against the cool, unforgiving surface of the washing machine. For a brief moment, I gave in to the overwhelming sensation. He tasted like spearmint and cigarettes. It was amazing to feel his young, healthy body pressed against mine. But then the moment ended it. A wave of guilt hit me like a wrecking ball, leaving me gasping for air like I'd been underwater for too long. "Jacob, this is wrong," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and regret. "I know you feel the same way. Don't try to deny it." "I can't do that," I mumbled, unable to get my words out. "I'm married to Jacob, and you're my best friend's son. This is a line we need to respect." Even as I said it, I felt like I should take it back, as if they hadn't been said. I couldn't handle the intensity of his gaze. I left the basement, leaving him there by himself. I went to my bedroom and locked the door, as if I needed to get away from the chaos inside. Oh, my heart, what have I done? That question kept going through my mind, like a constant reminder of my guilt. How could I have let this happen? I couldn't get to sleep that night, Michael. My husband was lying next to me, finally back from an extended business trip. He was clueless about the chaos going on inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jacob's kiss in vivid detail. I could feel his lips pressing against mine, his body warm against mine, and I could feel the way he made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. My conscience was troubled by years of guilt, but it was also accompanied by a dangerous thrill. It was a forbidden thrill that both fascinated and held me captive. The days that followed were a tense dance of avoidance and stolen glances. Jacob and I tried to keep things as normal as possible in front of Michael, but there was a tangible, unspoken tension in the air. Every casual touch and shared moment in the same room served as a stark reminder of the forbidden intimacy we'd shared one afternoon when Michael was away. Jacob found me in the kitchen. He had a determined look in his eyes, like he was facing a challenge. He began to speak in a low, steady voice. "We can't keep pretending this isn't going on. I know you're married and I know it's a tricky situation, but I have to tell you that I feel something for you. I can't just ignore it." I took a moment to steady myself against the cool granite countertop. I let out a shaky sigh, which didn't do much to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I can feel it. I feel it too, but this can't happen. There are too many people involved for us to take this lightly. He came closer, and I could feel the warmth of his presence. What if there's a way we can make this work? He asked quietly. His voice was smooth and seductive. What if we could work together without causing any harm? His words were a dangerous temptation, like a siren's song that was luring me down a treacherous path. A part of me wanted to give in, but I knew that wasn't the right move. To give in to temptation and indulge in the forbidden, or to hold on to my composure and resist temptation. A part of me wanted to throw caution to the wind, but a stronger, more rational part of me clung desperately to the remnants of my composure. I'm not sure how, Jacob, I replied, my voice hinting at a sadness that reflected the conflict within. I'll show you, he said, holding my gaze. He captured mine, and before I could object, his lips were on mine again. This time, I didn't put up a fight, and I didn't hesitate. My resolve crumbled, and I gave in to the intoxicating pull of his kiss. My hands roamed over his body, tracing the strong lines of his young, fit physique as we kissed with a raw, intense passion that was both intoxicating and terrifying. The world around us receded, leaving just the two of us, lost in a bubble of pleasure that was forbidden and pleasurable. When we finally broke apart, we were both out of breath. I was out of breath and shaking. I knew I'd crossed a line. I'd gone as far as I could and tasted the forbidden fruit. I'd been found out, and the consequences were now unavoidable. I told him I had feelings for Jacob. He listened closely, his young face serious for his age. We both recognized the complicated situation we were in. We need to consider the potential consequences of moving forward with this. There could be some pretty serious consequences. I'm eager to proceed, but I also recognize the need for caution. If we go ahead with this, we need to keep it on the down low. Jacob's expression turned serious. I see your point, Emily. This is between us. And that's how our secret affair got started. Whenever we could, we managed to sneak around together. A brief touch in the hallway while Michael was at work, a hushed conversation in the kitchen. Late at night, every encounter was a thrilling, risky adventure. The fact that we were hiding what we were doing made it more exciting. So every kiss felt more intense and every touch more electric. But I always felt guilty when Michael smiled at me or called me honey, or I reached for my hand, and I felt guilty. I thought of Claire, my friend, who had no idea about the betrayal that was going on right under her roof. One evening, Jacob and I were relaxing on the couch in the living room. We were at our wits' end with keeping this secret. The soft light cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, reflecting my inner turmoil. His familiar scent, which usually had an aphrodisiac effect, suddenly felt overwhelming. I pulled away from him, feeling guilty. I started to cry. His expression was a little blurred, but he seemed worried. Jacob, we need to stop this. I spoke in a quiet, barely audible voice. I can't keep living like this. I can't keep letting Michael and the CLA down. His face fell, and the confidence he usually showed gave way to a vulnerability that mirrored my own. For a moment, I saw a hint of defiance in his eyes, like he was trying to cling to what we had. But then he saw the tears streaming down my face and the utter despair in my eyes, and he knew it was over. I know he said it was wrong, Emily, but I just couldn't help myself. I couldn't stop thinking about you. His words were like a punch in the gut, adding to the... I knew exactly how he felt. Exactly how he felt. The desire had consumed me just as. But that didn't make it right. It only made the betrayal worse. We've gone too far, Jacob, I said, my voice cracking a little. I'm not sure how we can bounce back from this. The words lingered in the air, carrying the weight of our damaged relationship. We need to put an end to this now, before it gets any worse. Everything we love, including Jacob's youthful face, which was usually so vibrant, was affected by a pain that mirrored my own. He reached out and touched me lightly, catching a tear from my cheek. The gesture was really sweet, but it made me feel even worse. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's going to be a challenge. Impossible, I agreed, feeling the weight of his words. His words made it clear that we needed to end this arrangement. It felt like I was losing a part of myself and the connection between us. There was an undeniable electric charge in every stolen glance and every forbidden touch. The thought of never seeing him again, the warmth of his embrace, the spark of desire in his eyes was almost unbearable. But the other option, the agonizing guilt, the potential devastation to our families, was just too much to handle. The days that followed were a bit of a blur, with a lot of forced smiles and carefully constructed interactions. Jacob and I were both avoiding each other, but we were still trying to keep the peace in the middle of a silent war in our hearts. Every time we had dinner with Michael and Claire, it felt like we were walking on eggshells, and every casual conversation with them was similarly fraught. The constant worry about being found out and the weight of our secret were overwhelming. Then, something shifted. That evening, the carefully constructed facade came crashing down when Michael came home. He was usually pretty cheerful, but that night he seemed more serious. I was sitting on the sofa with a book in my lap, but I couldn't focus on the words on the page. He sat next to me, looking at me with a kind of intense clarity. "Emily," he began, his voice low and steady, "I think there's something wrong. Tell me what's going on. I need to know more." "What are you, a bird trapped in a cage?" I asked about Michael, trying to sound innocent. My voice was a little shaky, though with a bit of effort. He took my hand in his. The touch, which is usually so comforting, now felt like it. "I know," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "What about you and Jacob?" "You and Jacob," he said, barely audible. The room felt like it was tilting, and the familiar furniture seemed to sway and distort my carefully constructed world around me. "Michael," I stammered, but I couldn't get the words out. "Your phone and I were in on the secret." We both noticed that tears were welling up in my eyes, stinging a bit. I felt like I'd done something wrong. I felt guilty and regretful. I realized I'd been so wrapped up in my own selfish desires that I hadn't thought about how my actions would affect the man I'd promised to love. "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry," I said, my voice filled with emotion. The words were a bit of a shock to me. "I never meant to hurt you, Michael. That was never my intention." He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. Her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. "I know, Emily, but it doesn't change anything. Nothing can change that." He found a way to speak through the pain. "I just need to get my head around this. Was there something I did that caused this? Was I at fault? I messed up big time. I was a bit weak and selfish. I was selfish." There was a long, awkward pause between us. At last, the weight of our broken reality pressed down on us. Michael let out a sigh. It was a sound filled with fatigue and resignation. He let go of my hand, and the loss of contact made me feel even more uneasy. "I'm not sure what to do, Emily," he admitted. He sounded really emotional. The thought of losing him and the life we had built together was unbearable. I was overwhelmed with sobs, realizing the impact of my actions. Michael stood up slowly and deliberately. He went over to the door. He stopped on the other side of the door, facing away from me. "I need some time," he said quietly. "I need to think this through and decide if I can move on. But I want you to know that I care about you, Emily. I've always had feelings for you, and that's what makes this so difficult." He left, and the door closed behind him. The finality of his words reverberated throughout the room. I was left alone with the consequences of my choices, the overwhelming guilt, and the frightening uncertainty of the future. I knew that things would never be the same again. The affair was over, but it was still on my mind. It was a constant reminder of the trust one had broken and the pain I had caused. There was still a long, difficult road ahead of me in trying to rebuild what I had broken, and I wasn't sure if it was even feasible.